Good afternoon and welcome to the Calix webinar, BEAD or Bust, How Will Broadband Businesses Win BEAD Money Under New NTIA Guidance? I'm Susan Friedman from Calix. We will be starting in just a minute, so grab your coffee and get ready for an insightful conversation. Just a few quick tips and notes before we get started. This webinar is designed to be interactive, so please ask questions at any time by dropping them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the session. The chat, also located at the bottom of your screen, is open too. Please share your thoughts and reactions to the conversation. You can also use the chat if you're having any technical issues. During the webinar, we will have a few live poll questions. Thank you in advance for your participation in these polls, for they help us tailor the conversation and webinars and follow-up experiences to meet your needs. Today's session is being recorded, and a link with the recording will be sent to all who register. Please share this link with your colleagues who may be interested in this session. With that, I'll turn it over to today's moderator, Kevin Sievert, Calix Senior Broadband Strategy Manager. Kevin, let's get started.
Great. Thanks, Susan. I appreciate it. So I appreciate everybody coming today. I know, BEAD has been a long process, and certainly the announcement made on June 6th has created a lot of confusion and a lot of questions in the industry, and we were going to try and pull this webinar together to try and give you guys some points and tips on how to move forward through the new BEAD guidelines. So with me today, we have Shapur Azediar, who is our lead funding analyst, and Shane Carroll, who's our regional VP of sales engineering. Shapur will be talking about some of the funding and financial aspects of the BEAD program, and Shane will be going over some more of the detailed technical issues and items that we are recommending that you cover in your application. So I think to get started, we'll start with a poll question. Where are your questions when it comes to the new BEAD rules? Go ahead and select all that apply. Scoring rubric, definition of priority broadband project, network design and compliance, BABA, etc., or meeting the funding match requirements. It looks like you'll have to pick only one. Go ahead and select which one is your biggest question. Okay, so it looks like between the scoring rubric and the network design are the two main ones, with the definition of broadband project coming next. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about just a very quick summary of the new BEAD guidance, key changes, key language, and the new timeline. Then we'll go on to essentially recommendations on how we're suggesting you modify your application. We'll talk about state variations and basically streamlining your current applications and essentially making the necessary changes and additions based on the new guidance. Shane will then talk a little bit more detail about some of the technical considerations, because we believe that is going to be the most significant aspect of your application. Then Shapur will come on and talk about some of the funding aspects and match requirements. Then we'll kind of talk about next steps and do a Q&A at the end of the session. So with that, like I said, on June 6th, the NTIA came out with a new restructuring policy. Essentially, they removed several of the statutory social policies. That includes labor, climate change, open access, middle class affordability, low-cost service option. They removed some aspects of those, or they removed that requirement in total. Some of them, they did keep some aspects. For example, under the climate change requirements, there was a discussion about the resiliency of the network design. That's still in place. And for the low-cost service option, they essentially eliminated the language around the low-cost service option in the example, but they still require applicants to provide what their low-cost service option is. They also moved to a technology neutral guidance and essentially rescinded the previous guidance of June of last year and December of last year, which included the alternative technologies, since now all technologies are to be equally viable for all locations. They also changed the scoring rubric. That was a significant change. They're focusing on the lowest cost application as the primary scoring criteria, with a secondary scoring criteria. And we'll talk about the scoring rubric. It is a significant change with the lowest cost application, but with some of the key language, I think we're going to be able to explain how best to position your applications to be successful. The other thing that the new guidance provided was some basically instructions on how the states are to handle eligible locations and the changes. They allowed unlicensed fixed wireless to come in and provide eligibility at 100/20. They do have to provide evidence of that. Then there's possible new RDOF defaults that they need to work through. The state will need to work through with the NTIA to encompass those. They also provided the capability of applicants to remove high cost per location BSLs. A lot of the states during their application phase required applicants to provide an application that covered 100% of the locations. And as such, some of the applications were skewed because they had to cover locations that, I think the NTIA provided some examples, but we're well over $100,000 per location. Now, this new guidance essentially pushes the states to allow applicants to remove these high-cost locations and essentially provide the best stewardship of the BEAD money. The NTIA did not specify any requirements for that high cost per location value. That's up to the states, but the NTIA ultimately has a say at the end of the day. They also have required the states to look at the FCC version 6 BSLs, and they had some limited guidance on how they need to update eligible locations based on that. They also withheld the guidance for non-deployment funds and said that states must use the NTIA's environmental permitting tool in their process. They also rescinded all previous approved final proposals and provisional awards. So we know 3 states had their final proposals approved. Those 3 states had to pull back those final approvals and those awards. There were also several other states that had basically provided or notified ISPs of a winning application. Those also had to be withdrawn. And essentially this whole effort, the guidance introduced this final benefit of the bargain round, which essentially put all the states on the same shot clock. It started a 90-day shot clock on June 6th, which means the final proposal are required to be submitted to the NTIA by September 4th. Now we're starting to hear that some states are requesting a 90-day extension to that September 4th deadline. We expect that there will be a handful of states that are given that, but in those handful of states, You can look at the NTIA dashboard, BEAD dashboard, and identify the states that haven't even begun their application process. Those are the ones that are most likely to get the extensions. But the vast majority of all the other states have publicly announced that they're following the timeline and that they'll be moving forward on this 90-day period. So with that, really the key language, and this is interesting from the poll results, the key language that we believe is going to be critical for what the states want to do for their constituents is talking to a lot of broadband directors over the course of the last year and even the last couple of weeks. All of them understand that fiber is kind of that long-term future-proof technology, and they really want to deploy as much fiber as they can because they know that is going to position their state for the next several decades. And so if you look at what the new guidelines provided, they were very specific about the requirements, the technical requirements of the 100 megabits downstream, 20 megabits upstream, and the 100 milliseconds latency. That hasn't changed from the previous guidance, but they basically did say that the technology that would qualify as a priority broadband project easily scales to speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households, businesses, supports the deployment of 5G and successor wireless technologies and other advanced services. And so we're starting to hear from states, and I was on the Indiana state BEAD webinar last week. They basically said, gigabit services was what they're considering advanced services. And so really the key here that we think our customers need to leverage in this benefit of the bargain round is to make sure that they set the golden standard for what a priority broadband project is. Let them know that we not only meet their basic technical requirements, but we excel at them. And we also scale over time and all of the points that are here in the priority broadband project. The other thing that was interesting as part of the guidance, if you go to the footnote on page 38, it talks about what a non-priority proposal would look like. And essentially it has the same technical specs, the 100/20 and the 100 milliseconds latency, but it says not necessarily meet the statutory scalability requirements. Well, that statutory scalability requirements are essentially what's in the green under the priority broadband project. So essentially it could be all of these technologies that say, hey, we can qualify for BEAD today, but it is not going to be able to scale to gigabit services and things of that nature. So those are the two things that we think the state are going to really be looking at as part of the application. And any provider, any applicant can essentially ask the state to view their application as a priority broadband project. Now, the state is going to look at the language that's in the guidance, and they're going to have to make the determination as to whether it is a priority broadband project or not. And really the difference comes from this easily scale speeds over time and meets essentially the requirements of the next generation technologies and services. So now looking at the new timeline, like I said, the 90-day shot clock started. We basically have 66 days left. So we're almost a third of the way into it. During the 90 days, if you look at that list on the left, that is not everything, but that's most of everything the state needs to do in order to meet that 90-day deadline. So they have all of the unlicensed fixed wireless notice and evidence. They have to submit an initial proposal correction letter and get it approved. They have to update their locations, run pre-qualifications, applications, scoring, reconciliation and negotiations with all of the ISPs to try and make sure all of the locations are covered, do all of the part of that scoring is understanding what is the lowest cost It's not just the lowest cost application, but it is the lowest cost to the BEAD to serve everyone in that state that is an eligible location. So even though a location might, or even though an application might only have 80% and it's the lowest cost, the question is what is it going to cost to cover that other 20%? So the state has to look at all of those variables and come up with a solution that essentially optimizes the BEAD funding for that state and for each one of those proposed serving areas. So in general, the time frame was in June. We had the guidance was released. That's when they're going to do the unlicensed fixed wireless stuff. They're starting to do location information, and even some states have started their prequal and even closing their prequal June 30th. July, we think that there's going to be some prequal carryover in other states. Their states are going to run their application phase, and they're going to start their scoring and negotiations. Because really August, September, yeah, September 4th you submit. So August is when all of the negotiations have to be done, provisional awards. There is a required public comment period. I've seen that range from 7 to 14 days. And then the state still has to finalize its final proposal to submit it on September 4th. So with that, let's talk about the BEAD application modifications that we're recommending. So one thing that we've seen time and time again from the NTIA in their collateral is the states have flexibility to implement this new guidance, right? So the states have, even though there's that 90-day window, the states have different schedules and steps they'll follow. They might run pre-qual and application concurrently. They might run them serially. Application windows might go from a few days to 2 weeks, right? There's also all of the interpretation of the guidance, and then exactly how the state is going to set up the application period, whether it's a questionnaire or a narrative or a hybrid. How they're going to apply the secondary scoring criteria. There are essentially three that the state can use if it comes down to the secondary scoring criteria, but the NTIA provided no guidance on the weighting of those three. And as I said before, this high cost per location threshold, we don't know if it's going to be $100,000 per location, which is what the NTIA pointed out, or it's going to be less. I expect it will be less, but we have no idea what the states are going to do. As far as the PSA location removal, we've seen, I've been on about a half a dozen different state webinars, and I've heard that states are allowing from 5 to 25% of a location in any PSA to be removed and still be considered an application for that proposed serving area. And so again, the states are going to have to look at how the ones that have been removed are going to be served and look at all of those costs as part of their assessment. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is in the latest FAQ that the NTI released, they were talking about the states will have to account for the technology, infrastructure, reliability, and resilience. And that kind of comes from that climate change aspect of it. And it basically said the applicant will deliver high quality, reliable, and resilient services. So again, the states are going to be looking at these types of directions from the NTIA to determine what is a priority broadband project and what is not a priority broadband project. And even in the Q&A, the NTIA indicated that a certain technology might not be considered a broadband or a priority broadband project in one PSA, but could in a different PSA based on, again, some things that the state can determine. And it could be, density, size of the PSA, and things of that nature. So again, the states have a lot of, buttons they can push and leverage they can pull as they are navigating this new guidance. So part of the thing, if you've applied for BEAD, That's great. You're in a great position. If you haven't applied for BEAD because of this very short and contracted benefit of the bargain round, I'll tell you, it's going to be a heavy lift to meet all of the requirements necessary to get an application in. Not impossible, but it is going to take a lot of work. The ones that have applied, you should definitely consider modifying your application based on the new guidance, right? As far as the administrative aspect, the sections that were listed earlier that the NTIA removed or eliminated from the guide from the original BEAD NOFO, pull those out of your application, pull those out of your narrative, because honestly, the states don't have a whole lot of time to read through a lot of information that is not applicable or eligible in their scoring criteria. The one exception I would make is they did take out the local coordination and stakeholder engagement section. But one thing that you should look at, and if it's in other sections like the climate change and things like that, look at the technology and see if there's anything uh, in that section that really is applicable to the new rules. For example, we talked about climate change and how the resilience and reliability of the network needs to be addressed. Well, it still needs to be addressed. It's just not directed by climate change, right? So those are things that you can keep in. And again, like the first responder or smart town descriptions, things like that, things that are going to have community impact, I would keep those in because that really, again, supports that next generation service. And honestly, it's a good it's a good service and benefit for the community that I think states want to see. The other thing that we'll talk about, and we're going to do it in kind of two different shifts. Shane's going to talk in a little bit more general terms about technology and the information that we should include, and really around that key language of the scalability, reliability, etc. One thing that I always keep forgetting because my mind is just so fixed on fiber is, we're always going, okay, well, we can do a gig symmetric today. We could have done that 5 years ago. And so what's new, right? You've got to remember that the perspective that we're coming at this from is we're starting with 100/20, right? So we got to keep that in mind and don't skip over the fact that we can do 100 meg symmetric. We can do hundreds of meg symmetric. We can do multi-gigabit services and even beyond as the technology grows. So those are things that I would just kind of keep in mind. Don't just think about it as a fiber solution. Think about what they're asking. They're saying, can you provide 100/20 with 100 millisecond latency? And then go from there, right? Because we are orders of magnitude better than that. So start there and grow and just show how much runway you have with your application. Then we'll also, one of the things, and Shane will talk about a lot of those, but one of the things that we'll also do is we're creating collateral that's specific around Calix's platform. And then the last thing that we'll do is we'll talk about some financial impacts. But one of the things that that obviously as an applicant you can do is you can go in and remove those individual locations that really skewed your application. And you might want to talk to your state broadband offices and identify if there's mechanisms there for you to potentially break your applications up based on a cost per BSL tier. Go in with a $3,000 and below to make sure you're competitive with what we're seeing as a typical LEO cost per location, and then potentially go up from there. But those are all things, again, since the state has so much variability, those are all things that I'd encourage you to sit down with your state, get on their webinars, sit on their office hours, and talk in detail.
And Kevin,
So
every
with
state is different, right? Every state's running on these same shot clocks, and they're struggling to meet these demands as well.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've been on a lot of the webinars we've been talking to, or I've been on with the states. Customers are asking questions, and the states are just basically saying, We don't know that yet, but it's coming, right? And so they are building the plane while it's flying. It's almost building the plane while it's landing, right? So it's even more dangerous. So they are under the gun and they are working as fast as they can to bring all that to you guys, and they're going to be the first ones. I expect a lot of things to start coming out this week. So with that, Shane, I'll hand it over to you and let you start talking about the technical considerations we raised earlier.
Absolutely. And we're going to start simple and get a little more complicated as we go through. So let's just talk about what everyone should know on this call. Fiber meets the current broadband priority project speeds. It's specifically built for high data and high throughput. So right now with XGS-PON available, we can do 10 gigabits with 8.5 gigs usable and be able to blow away that 100 by 20 meg threshold. And it's incredibly latency conservative. So you can usually get between 1 to 7 milliseconds within the fiber network. So we're going to well beyond the 100 milliseconds that's there. 100 milliseconds really encompasses other things like LEO and point-to-point wireless that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And, we also want to talk a little bit about why Calix is unique. So one of the things that they require you to do with these applications is to be able to show that you're meeting the demands of the system. So you're delivering that 100 by 20 or the 100 by 100 or whatever you were awarded for that. Well, Calix actually has a built-in performance system that does integrated performance testing with reporting that can feed right into the NTIA standards and give you a real-time monitoring system to help ensure that compliance. So not only are you able to deliver it, but you're able to show it to the FCC and show your BEAD performance standards as you go. So that's kind of the base floor of where we're going. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about how fiber can continue to meet those exceeding pieces. So next slide, please. So how do we exceed priority broadband? So if you're going to show that your fiber is better, how can you do that? Well, let's talk about it from a technology first, right? Today we can scale up to 10 gigabits with potential enhancements up to 50 gig available in the next year. So 50 gig is going to be widely available. It's going to deliver an ability to deliver massive amounts of bandwidth through that. And in the long term, while we're looking at the horizons, we're seeing 100 gig standards being worked on today. And if you look at the full bandwidth available on a fiber network, you're talking somewhere in the terabit scale potential if you could use all the bits that go through a while. So on DWDM and other advanced optics, we can get even more bandwidth through. So if you build it today, we're going to be able to use it for decades to come. To give you an example, most of the fiber that was built in the early 80s and early 90s are still in use today and still delivering that same quality experience. Can you say of anything else in your network that was built in the 80s or 90s that it's doing exactly what you wanted today? It's usually not something you can do. And we're also there to support the 5G symmetric structures that you need. So 5G delivers a huge amount of bandwidth into your network. If you're trying to deliver that onto something other than fiber, you're basically using a wireless technology to feed a wireless technology. It can be a little bit challenging as we go through. So how do you do a simultaneous support of that 5G cell that's delivering all that bandwidth and connectivity to household and businesses? Fiber is the answer. We're ready, and we've got application support for things like cloud computing, AI workloads, AR and VR for video in the home, smart grid, precision agriculture, edge computing, all of these things that are going to drive more business in your area and drive more data and technology capabilities in your area. That's incredibly important when you look at a technology that if you put it in today, you want it to be able to scale with the new applications and new needs of your community and businesses as they grow. And speaking of growth, wireless will continue to grow. Right now we have 5G and we even have millimeter wave. Millimeter wave can get you hundreds of megs to the air, but we're seeing technology will be able to deliver even more. So think terabits through the air. So right now the Wi-Fi 7 standard that's in progress can deliver up to 40 gigabits of bandwidth into the air. So we're going to continue to see these technologies grow. And again, you've got to be able to feed that data into the system. And by doing that, again, fiber is the key. So let's keep talking a little bit more about why. Whoops, you skipped the slide on me. So the other thing that really, when you start talking about the things that make your application different, is being able to support up to 99.999%, 5 nines, uptime and reliability. You can do that with resistive to electromagnetic interference or in mission critical infrastructure, low jitter, all those things. I always like to talk about if you pull telemedicine and start using remote surgery robots, you don't want any jitter, you don't want any delay, and you want that surgeon to have as much bandwidth as he possibly can. Those are the kind of things that network reliability and resiliency are going to be there for. And it's actually very long-term cost efficient. Though initial costs are going to be a little higher for fiber, right? We all know that. Long-term maintenance is much cheaper because once the fiber's in the ground, you very rarely have to touch it short of what I call backhoe fade, where somebody runs into it or blows it out of the ground. And operational financial efficiency, right? Specifically coming back to Calix, our fiber networks are incredibly simple to operate, incredibly maintenance efficient, and reduces your costs and speeds up your ROI. So, Kevin, I know you have a specific term about how you buy fiber. It's buy once.
Buy once, cry once.
That's it. Buy once and cry once. So as you do this, make sure that you show them all the things that fiber can do. It's not just a cost per competitive piece. It's actually what you can deliver to the broadband office and your community for the larger standards. Next slide, please. So what are you facing out there? Well, LEO and fixed wireless are really the ones that came into play now with the ability of this change in the NOFO. So when you look at LEO or fixed, there's a lot of things that are really different from fiber. So when you look at a wireless network that's going through atmosphere, it's going through layers of rain and snow and sleet and hills and all those kind of things, it's going to fluctuate in time. So they can, they might be able to get to 120 by 20, but there's no ability for them to guarantee it's going to always be that way. And just like shared technology for wireless, so if you could be out in the country at your house and have 5G service and get 20 megs easy. And you walk down the street where there's a school and all of a sudden you get half a meg. Why is that? It's not because there's less megs at the school. It's because more people are using the same bandwidth. And that's the same thing that happens in wireless and in LEO when you work with that. One of the other things I was working with is you've got to have access to a clear line of sky or a wall. Not all landlords and not all facilities have direct line of sight that they need to make this work. So when you look at trying to get a LEO in, LEO's okay. Usually you have access to the sky, but trees make a problem, rocks make a problem. Anything else could actually cause that to not be as efficient. And if you can't track the satellites well, you're back to that latency, jitter, and speed throughput issue. And I always like to talk about this. It blows my brain to think about the technology that LEO requires. Right now, Starlink thinks they're going to put up about 40,000 satellites. 40,000. They've got about 3,800 to 8,800, depending on who you talk to, that are in there, that are out there. So when you look at it, all of those pieces are just barely allowing them to deliver 100 by 20. So if you have thousands of satellites up right now, and you're going to add tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of clients to it, are you even going to keep 100 by 20 as your base reference? It's going to be a challenge, and I'm going to be really interested to see where that comes out of. And fixed wireless requires tall towers. It requires a lot of high power transmission equipment. It's also very finicky. It's subject to wind, rain, ice load, shedding, all the fun stuff that comes with it. And that's on both ends, right? There's one on the house that has to be facing towards it, and there's one on the tower. So when we get to it, it's just fiber just works, right? Install it once and it will serve you for decades as you go through. But let's talk a little bit about the future, because a lot of times you need to sell why it matters. So next slide, please. So when we look at where fiber is going, this is just 50 gig and 100 gig. We're now going to be able to deliver 10 gig and 25 gig service and even more as needed to these businesses. It sounds like an insane amount of bandwidth, but when you think about it, would you have thought that a dairy farm needed milking machines that have IoT that has data that feeds back into a cloud compute? All of these things are changing. All of our worlds are actually becoming more and more about data. So as that data grows, your needs to deliver to your enterprises and your businesses grow. We talked a little bit about mobile haul and offload, and we're also going to have to start talking about transport to MDUs, because when you look at an MDU is kind of like that school, right? There's a lot of people in a very small amount of space. How do you support that and do it well? And then when you start looking at it, even in the future, I'll talk about our Netflix moment. All of us that were in the industry, and Shapiro, I know you were probably playing on this when we were that age, but we all remember the Netflix moment where we had great networks, everybody was happy, and then Netflix dropped in and said, I can stream to anybody, anytime, across any place. And all of a sudden, the network designs that we built were no longer valid. Netflix cratered, we cratered, our peering points cratered, all the different pieces cratered. So we're looking to the future so that we are ready for that Netflix moment. With 50 gig, 100 gig, and even XGS-PON today, we're ready for the 4K, 8K streaming in the home, even metaverse if they decide to drive that kind of stuff in. So are other technologies ready for that future? I'd really argue they're not. And I'd argue that it's in your interest to help them understand why fiber is the future today. Back to you.
Great. Thanks, Shane. I appreciate it. That was a great summary. Shapur, how about you talk about some of the funding match and other financial considerations?
All right, sounds good. So, hello everybody. My name is Shapur Zadiyar. I'm Calix's lead funding analyst. So, like Kevin said, I'm going to be focusing on some of the financial considerations BSPs need to be making in light of the whole June 6th restructuring notice. So, a lot to unpack here, but I'm going to keep it focused on what matters the most as you revise and prepare your applications. So first things first, I want to start off with saying you guys should be removing all the costs tied to regulatory requirements that are no longer relevant, right? So as Kevin mentioned, as part of the restructuring, NTIA limited several requirements that previously drove up applicant costs, including things like climate change reporting and greenhouse gas analysis, net neutrality certifications, diversity and equity workforce documentations, and a few others as well. So important to note, if you included these expenses related to these requirements, they're no longer eligible under BEAD. So essentially that means they won't be reimbursed and won't be considered for any in-kind matches that you may be looking into as well. So now's really the time to clean up your budget and really ensure that all included costs are compliant with the latest guidance. Moving on, we have matching funding. So one of the most important financial levers that you have to under the new BEAD rules is your matching funding strategy, right? So under the updated guidance, it's not really a requirement anymore, but it can be more so looked at as sort of a competitive edge that you can use to enhance your applications. So the baseline is still a 25% match, but the NTIA has made it clear that states should prioritize proposals with lower total cost per location. So, and one of the most effective ways to bring that cost down is to offer more than the minimum match. So this is especially powerful for those fiber builds where the upfront cost may be slightly higher um, than other technologies, but a stronger match can, one, reduce the total federal dollars that you're asking from the NTIA, which would directly improve your score against competing technologies and increase your chances of securing an award, especially in those contested areas, right? So when we go back to sort of what types of match funds qualify and how can you expand them? Well, there's some flexibility that you can have when looking into your matching funds. So obviously private capital is a clear option. So whether through equity or debt, private investments can count towards your match. But it's important to note that if you're working with these financial partners, you got to ensure that those commitments are documented clearly for your state broadband office to review. Obviously, cash reserves, if you have any retained earnings or cash from previous builds or operations, that can be applied directly. In-kind contributions, so any existing infrastructure, long-term leases, donated lands or materials may count, but it's important that these rules vary state by state, so you're going to have to check in with your state broadband office and ensure that that is an eligible in-kind match that you can provide as well. Another thing is that with this new restructuring, there's also there's a lot of local or state support around this as well. So some states and counties and different cities offer matching grant services. So essentially check in with your state, see if there's any programs that are out there that can help that you can use to leverage for your matching funds and see if you can kind of use some of those resources that are available to you. So one example, I came back from where was I? I was in Ohio, and they mentioned that they actually have a specific program that applicants can apply for to help supplement some of that matching costs for your project. So look into your state, see if there's any programs that are similar to that, and see if you can leverage that. But essentially, if you're serious about winning BEAD funding, especially for a fiber first deployment, your match strategy is really, really important and should be a key component of your competitive proposal. Offering more where it counts and documenting clearly and aligning it with your technical plan will really go a long way in this next phase of the BEAD scoring process. Another thing that was touched on was the updating your location list. So many of the built proposals, many of the proposals that were built were based on earlier versions of the eligible locations map. But with the restructuring, states have been instructed to remove all the extremely high cost areas, add in the newly defaulted areas as well, and rely on the FCC BDC version 6 map. So essentially, this means that some locations in your original plan may now be ineligible, while others you were tracking may now be fair game. So check in with your state or any mapping consultants to align your footprint with the new eligibility lists. In some cases, this might mean shrinking your build project. In others, it might open up sort of new opportunities for other locations that may have defaulted from other programs. So one quick shout out, if you are looking for any assistance with mapping, any sort of mapping consultants or mapping tools, we have the resources that can help out. So just feel free to reach out and we will be happy to put you in touch with the right folks there. So last point that I wanted to kind of touch on, or second last point that I wanted to touch on, was strategic project areas. So Kevin briefly touched to it at the start, but I want to kind of circle back because I think this is really important. So one financial strategy that becomes even more relevant under these new rules is splitting up large project areas into multiple smaller ones, with multiple smaller ones that are more focused applications. Again, given that your state is allowing this. So reasons why I like this is because first, under the new scoring framework, right, cost per location is king. So if you bundle together high cost and low cost areas in a simple application, your average cost per location may go up, hurting your competitiveness against some other projects. So by splitting up your applications, you can isolate the more cost-effective areas, offering a higher match and score better in the overall evaluation process itself. Furthermore, breaking up the project also allows you to tailor sort of the technology stack and deployment strategy as well. So for example, a dense town might support fiber with a higher match, while a sparsely populated rural area, for example, might be better suited for say a fixed wireless. But you can also stagger build out times or structural capital differently by project. But finally, smaller applications often make it easier to demonstrate your readiness. So with fewer like variables and tighter geographic scope, it's easier to show states that how you can hit the ground running, stay on budget, and deliver impact quickly. So this kind of segmentation may not really make sense for every applicant, but for many, it's an effective way to lower your cost per location, increase your score, and I guess ultimately improve your chances of winning the BEAD support. Finally, Calix has a private funding team where we work very closely with a tight network of investors in our industry that are actively investing in our industry. So this ranges from private equity guys to venture capitalists, private debt, equipment, software financiers, all of the above, right? So if you need any sort of help finding the right source for your increased match or any private capital in general, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction and help you find that right fit. So that was about all I got, Kevin.
Thanks, Shapur.
No problem.
So I appreciate everybody staying longer. I know this has gone a little bit long, but just wanted to say, so next steps, if you want to schedule a consult with us, my email address is there. If you want to talk more about private funding, reach out to Shapur. If you want to talk about an engineering consult and discuss more about Calix's platform and how it's positioned to really be defined as that priority broadband project, reach out to Shane. We also have a state BEAD tracker that has all of the resources for BEAD, by state, and we've actually just modified that website, and we're now tracking all of the benefit of the bargain key information. We're working on getting that all updated, so bear with us, but we're trying to get that done quickly. If you're looking for more Calix resources, like I said, we're developing resources to help you respond to your application questions or to put into your application narratives. Reach out to your sales team. We also have other resources that we have been collecting that talks about other technologies, some white papers or industry articles that might highlight some of the shortcomings of these technologies, if that was something that you're interested in trying to highlight as part of your application. Reach out to your sales team, and then we'll be able to pass that information along to you. So with that, we've got our last poll question here. If you're interested in a consult with one of us, whether it's funding, whether it's a deployment question or a just BEAD in general, just click one of those links or click one of those buttons. We'll be happy to set up some time where you can ask one-on-one questions, and we can help position your applications for the most success that we can get. So with that, I know, why don't we go ahead and close the polls if everybody's got a chance to answer. So with that, if there are any questions, I wanted to try and close this off by 1:45, but if there
So,
is anybody that has any questions, we can address that.
so we got one question in the chat, Kevin.
Okay.
So with the new NTIA rules, does fiber even have a chance to win in the BEAD program? Great
Okay. Yeah,
question.
sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I've had the opportunity to be on about 6 state webinars over the last week to 10 days. And they're all very much the same. They're still defining it. They don't have a lot of answers to questions, but to answer that question, fiber absolutely has a chance. And I think with the way that the new guidelines were written, and the fact that it really allows the states to define what a priority broadband project is. And as we talked about earlier about the scalability and advanced services and network requirements that are going to be needed, not just in the next 2 to 5 years, but really, I think the NTIA provided guidance to the states and the states are looking at this for the next 10 to 20 years, right? And so I think fiber is really well positioned at that. And as I said, the states have various buttons and levers at their disposal that I believe will allow them to continue to do what's best for their state with regards to various technologies and kind of wrapping up this whole unserved and underserved BSLs in their states.
Okay.
We have any other questions? Again, this recording will be sent to those on the call, and if you have colleagues, some of your other friendly service providers, if they're interested in this information, let us know. We can certainly give them access to the recording. Again, reach out to us with any consults, and I appreciate your time and allowing us to go a little bit over the scheduled time to address all of the key information that we had to give to you guys today. And I want to thank Shane and Shapur for their expertise and helping me out with this webinar. Susan, any closing thoughts or comments?
It's a fantastic webinar, guys. Thank you very much to our presenters, and thank all of you for joining us today. If you have any follow-up questions, something you think about later on today or next week, please give us a call. You can book a free consultation with any of our specialists on calix.com. Have a wonderful day.